Recorded live from Hong Kong and Toronto. Let's go! This is the PR and Law Podcast.
The PR and Law Podcast.
Turn it up. With your hosts, Cam McMurchie and Ewan Christie.
Welcome to episode 35 of the PR and Law Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McMurchie, along with Ewan Christie.
Hello, Cameron.
Ewan's an employment lawyer and partner at Duntroon LLP in Toronto, Canada, and he's online at duntroon.law. I'm a PR guy based in Hong Kong and publisher of the Digital Bits PR and Communications newsletter. You can find that at digitalbitspr.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please tell a friend. You can also follow us on social media, of course, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can subscribe to the show on YouTube and SoundCloud as well. And most important of all, sign up for our newsletter. You can get updates when new episodes drop and other show information at prlawpodcast.com. Club. So a quick little show note off the top here. We were going to have Courtney Lukic from Gotham PR on the show today, and we've pushed that back one more week. So she is going to join us, and you're going to want to definitely tune in for that one because she's got a lot of interesting stuff to say regarding politics and Joe Biden and Donald Trump and everything happening around them. But we've got a lot of other stuff to talk about today. Ewan, what's going on with you?
Yeah, never shortage of topics for our show, hey?
Yeah, especially this week. I feel like I had people reaching out to me and requesting subjects today.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and we aim to please, so we will most certainly be addressing some of those issues. What's going on in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, we do take requests at the PR Law Podcast. Not much here. It feels like Christmas, and it's going to be such a weird one. We touched on this a little bit before, the fact that, we're spending Christmas in Hong Kong for the first time, even though I've lived here for 12 years. It's the first Christmas. There's a tree. We got an actual real Christmas tree that's up with lights and decorations, and friends have come over to help decorate. And we had a group dinner here tonight. So yeah, it's odd, but we're doing the best we can with it.
Wow. That sounds cool. You should, maybe you should post a little shot somewhere on our page.
Yeah.
What's your tree? How big's your tree, Cam?
That's
not the real question.
It's not very big. It's one of those. It's big enough that it's on a stand on the ground, but it only comes up a few feet. But it's a start. But I got to say, Ewan, it is still odd having a Christmas tree when you can open the window and it's 22 degrees outside, so it doesn't feel like Christmas.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that's probably normal for some people, but yes, as a Canadian, that's a very, very odd. That's got to be so bizarre. I can't imagine.
Yeah, it takes some getting used to. Anyway, yeah, we're going to talk about an issue in Canada this week, but it's got a fascinating turn and it deals with COVID-19. So I'm going to talk about that. But first up, we're going to talk about law.
Continue the debate with us on social media. Join us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PR Law Podcast. All one word, PRLAW Podcast. Send us your questions now by email to askus@prlawpodcast.com. That's all one word, askus@prlawpodcast.com. Or on social media with the hashtag PRLawPod. That's hashtag PRLAWPOD.
All right, what's happening, Ewan?
Well, Cam, speaking of the holidays and how this is just sort of an odd year in that regard, I wanted to talk about the work holiday party, Cam. This is, you ask any employment lawyer and they will tell you that every year we get at least one, and more often than not, several more than that, clients, employers, or employees getting in touch and advising of the fallout from a holiday party.
I bet.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. There are just so many things, so many ways for the parties to go completely sideways. But I think this year it's going to be interesting because at least here we're on a complete lockdown. Now I know that's not the case everywhere, but obviously social distancing is an issue. A lot of bars, restaurants, banquet halls, etc., places where holiday parties would typically occur are closed. And it sort of leaves an interesting situation for employers here. What are they going to do? Are they just going to postpone the holiday party until, sometime in the future when it's safe and get everybody together, maybe next summer or something like that? Or are they going to come up with some alternatives? Now, the correct answer to what they should do, Cam, is just postpone. Do not throw any parties right now. And really, that's just a simple liability issue, right, Cam? I mean, one of the first things that we saw to go when we started imposing restrictions because of COVID was around dining and drinking. And I'm sure you've been following some of the press here, Cam, where bars have been closing very, very early and then closing in their entirety. And that really just sort of seems like common sense, that when people start to drink, they get a little more comfortable with each other. They're probably less inclined to wear masks. They're less inclined to keep distance, and transmission rates go up. So employers, if you're not going to be having your party elsewhere, because you probably can't right now, please, please, please don't see as a solution that, we'll just move the party in-house to our office. That's not really a solution, because all of the same hallmark issues, Cam, they're still there. You still have issues of liability of how are you going to get people to and from? If you're serving alcohol or food, how are people masked? How are they going to be masked? How are they going to social distance? And the biggest issue here, Cam, is what are you going to do as an employer if, God forbid, somebody transmits COVID during your holiday party? I mean, it's all kinds of new levels of liability that employers need to watch out for.
So I have a lot of questions about this. I guess the first off is my understanding, and again, I'm not in Canada or the US, but my understanding is there are restrictions on private gatherings. So is it even legal to have a private event that has like 20 or 50 or 100 people at it? Because I know here it's not. You can still go into a restaurant here, but there's right now a maximum of 2 people per table, but the restaurants are all open and you can go dine. But if you're having a gathering at home, I think it's just got to be your people who live in the same house or something like that. There's some kind of restriction like that. So you can't have a very big party anyway, but is that still possible there?
No, I mean, we're on complete lockdown here. So that should not be happening. My concern, and again, my concern isn't for larger companies and mid-sized companies. My concern here, Cam, is for a lot of the smaller companies, small offices that have maybe 10, 15, 20 employees who are thinking, hey, we can probably just throw a little party around here. But again, as soon as you start introducing food and drink, then, that transmission rate, the risk starts to increase. And really, that's just not the sort of liability that any employer wants to incur. So, just be safe, postpone it, maybe set a date sometime down the road so that, your staff are aware of the fact that you're not canceling the holiday party. We will do something at some point, but let's avoid doing something right now and try and keep safe.
Right. And the interesting thing here though is our holiday party last year was canceled because we had civil unrest and protests in the streets in Hong Kong. And so we thought, next year, 2020, we'll be able to have one. No, now there's a global pandemic. So now there's two years wiped out here. But Ewan, aside from you're talking very specifically about concerns over COVID and the liability around that. But I would like to ask you, because you've been in employment law for many years, I imagine you've had many other issues that arise from holiday parties, probably a lot of them having to do with alcohol. And even throughout my own career, I've been shocked at times of things that I've seen happen at holiday parties or things people have said. There definitely seem like a place where, lawyers could do quite well if they hung out at these holiday parties and looked for clients. Well, yeah. I mean, funny to that point, a prominent employment lawyer who shall remain nameless sent out a somewhat cheeky tweet saying, well, with COVID and all of the cancellation of holiday parties, what are employment lawyers going to do for work? Because this really does bring in a fair amount of work each and every year. But yeah, Cam, in trying to address some of those questions, I mean, the when of the holiday party is always a big question, right? Employees don't want to attend their holiday party midweek on a Wednesday night. But there's also a lot of
very, very, very strong logical reasons as to why an employer might want to consider doing that, or at least on a Thursday night, right? And the simple fact is that employees are more often than not, they're going to be less inclined to drink too much, to stay out really, really, really late if they know or there's an expectation that they have to go to work the following day. So that's always a consideration, is the when of the party. The where of the party, we talked about that a little bit, right? Are you going to do it at another establishment? Are you going to do it at your office place? If you're doing it elsewhere, Cam, how are you getting people there? How are people being moved to and from the party? And if the party's running late, how are people getting home? One of the easiest things to do here is, you provide your employees with taxi chits, right? At the beginning of the evening, everyone gets one. And then, as an employer, that you have at the bare minimum, you have provided means for your employees to safely get home, such that if they do drink too much, if they do stay out too late, that at the end of the day, they've got a safe ride that's going to get them to their doorstep.
Or at least that you have provided a safe ride, whether they take you up on that offer and use that taxi jet, who knows? But I guess that's one issue. And then what else, Ewan? Because the alcohol thing is an interesting one. Having attended these parties in Canada and then having attended them in mainland China and then in Hong Kong, obviously there's cultural differences. All three of those are profoundly different. They're not alike in any way, really. And in many ways, especially in Hong Kong, it's not a heavily drinking culture, actually, among sort of local Hong Kong culture. But so a lot of times the holiday parties I've been to here have been a little more reserved, except for certain groups, usually people who have moved to Hong Kong from somewhere else, and they can get even more rowdy than anything I ever saw back home. In those kinds of situations, I guess I can guess what you're going to say, which will be the typical things of, don't serve too much, be careful. Yeah, make sure they've got their rides home. But is there any other sort of advice for those situations? And basically keeping some people safe, because obviously, sometimes, when guys, especially younger guys who are well off, if they're in the financial services sector, sometimes girls end up facing some unwanted advances at these things that I've seen that are really, really uncomfortable. But what's your advice for that, Ewan, to make sure that everyone is safe and has a good time?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a bad idea for an employer in advance of a holiday party to circulate, just a short email reminding employees of expectations, right? And one of the things that they can sort of touch upon are any, policies, workplace policies around harassment, anti-discrimination, these sorts of things, to just ensure that, it's front of mind for those employees on their way out that, I've got to, I have to make sure that I'm behaving and I'm sticking within the parameters and the guidelines of acceptable behavior. And that's always one of the issues with a holiday party, right, Cam? And this is something that employees need to keep in mind. Just because you're halfway across town from your office and in a restaurant or a bar or a nightclub with your employees, this is a work function. And that means that you should act in a professional and consistent manner, just as you would on a Monday morning in the office. And you're right, issues around harassment, discrimination, sexual harassment, these issues always, always, always occur at holiday parties. And it doesn't matter how many times employment lawyers write articles about this, speak about it on podcasts, in the media. For whatever reason, we continue every year to see occurrences of this kind of behavior. So, I think that's one of the big things an employer can do. Circulate your policies and procedures in advance of a holiday party. Remind employees of what the expectations are. Is that a little heavy-handed to do? Well, no, I don't think that it is. Is it going to spoil the mood of the party? Perhaps, but you know what? Who cares? What's more important is that your staff is safe and that your staff feel comfortable interacting with everyone else in an environment like that. That is, still a work function.
I mean, just to draw from personal experience. I mean, when I was younger, I did love these holiday parties, but I was also, I've realized that, earlier in my career, when I was a little bit less senior, it was much more fun for all kinds of reasons. I mean, I was better friends or closer friends with a lot of the fellow employees. Whereas when I, moved into management, it's very different and the expectations are very different. And obviously the risks are very different. So I don't even enjoy going to these things now because I'm probably thinking too much about it. Because I do treat it like it's work. And I behave as though it's like work. So it's not that much fun then if I treat it that way, but it is kind of the way that people have to treat them sometimes, I think, especially if you are a manager and you do have people reporting to you.
Yeah, well, and you know what? I think that that's actually just a good policy on your own part, Cam. Is I understand you don't want to have to be stressed and feeling anxious at these sorts of events. I mean, the whole idea is the complete opposite. But at the same time, it's not always the extremes. It's not always someone drank too much and then sexually harassed a colleague. I mean, these are the more extreme ends of what can occur. But, also just the idea of you lose your inhibition after a few drinks. And maybe you went up to your boss and you said something that was inappropriate because you were feeling a little more comfortable than otherwise. Is it going to be cause for discharge or something that will result in your termination? Not necessarily, but it could compromise an ability to get promoted. It could compromise your professional relationship with that individual. You have no idea who else that manager is going to convey that information to. So, be careful as employees. Don't drink too much, and if it's an employer doesn't have to create a situation where there's some sort of open bar and there's just booze free flowing throughout the evening. One way you can avoid those sorts of occurrences, hand out drink tickets. Give every employee 2 drink tickets at the beginning of the evening. And that way, you've done something to try and curb the consumption levels of the alcohol. Also, make sure that, you have some awareness when you're circulating that email, Cam, about harassment, discrimination, reminding employees of what appropriate behavior is and what inappropriate behavior is. Talk about impairment levels. Talk about recognizing when someone might be impaired, and talk about employees and create an environment where employees can approach management and say, hey, you know what? I think so-and-so may have had too much to drink. I wanted to bring it to your attention. Can we address this before things get out of hand, right? So you really have to do a lot of pre-planning. When we think about the holiday party, we think about, what's going to be on the menu? Where are we going to have it? Who's going to be there? When is it going to be? But really, the pre-planning stage has to be addressing a lot of these legal issues as well, Cam, because you know what? It's not just bad for the employees when they're subject to issues of harassment or discrimination. It reflects really, really poorly on the employer. And the last thing you want is an employee turning around and suing you for, an incident of sexual harassment while at a work function, but also that employee going to another company somewhere down the road and conveying what they were subject to while at your company. That's a really, really easy way to very quickly destroy your company's reputation.
Good advice, Ewan.
Show your support to the PR and Law podcast by making a one-time donation or setting up a subscription with us on Patreon. Every little bit helps us keep the lights on and bring the show to you each week. If you'd like to chip in, please visit prandlawpodcast.com. That's prandlawpodcast.com. Click support the show. Thanks for helping us out.
There were a few issues this week, Ewan, that came up that I thought were excellent show material. And then one appeared really late into the week that seemed to generate a lot of conversation, at least among sort of other Canadians, other people in my friend circle. I doubt it made much news outside of Vancouver, I would say. But the issue, and I think you may have heard about it, Ewan, revolves around the anthem singer of the Vancouver Canucks National Hockey League team. We don't normally talk about anthem singers on this show, but he's been doing it since 2001. He's quite well known in the community. I think he sang during the Winter Olympics when they were held in Vancouver. He attends a lot of the larger events there, and he's sort of famous because in the middle of singing "O Canada," he for one verse he just points the microphone at the crowd, and the crowd sings the verse of "O Canada." So it's a big moving kind of event that he's become famous for. So he's a well-liked guy in general, but he decided last week to attend an event in Vancouver. It was actually a protest against what Mark Donnelly, the anthem singer, calls the tyranny of COVID-19 restrictions. And it was called the Christmas Freedom Rally in Vancouver. And so hundreds of people showed up there to protest the restrictions that have been put in place in the province of British Columbia by the health officer in BC. And so, I mean, he spoke to the media. He called them draconian lockdown protocols. Here's a quote of what he said. "What was originally sold as a 15-day hunkering down spirit for the common good has turned into a 10-month marathon from hell, where the finish line is constantly being moved further into the distance." Once it became known that he was going to attend this event, the Vancouver Canucks hockey team fired him for this. And this became known on Twitter, in fact, when the Vancouver Sun published an article about Mark Donnelly and his views on the lockdown. And it was retweeted by the owner of the Vancouver Canucks, who corrected the Vancouver Sun and said he is not the Vancouver Canucks anthem singer. He's the former Vancouver Canucks anthem singer. This has obviously caused a bit of an uproar on two sides. On the one side, you have people who fully support the firing of Mark Donnelly. And on others, it's sort of seen again as sort of another example of cancel culture. I do want to put one little wrinkle in here, Ewan, just to fully understand the dynamics. The owner of the Vancouver Canucks is Francesco Aquilini, and he's not well liked at all in the community. There's been a lot of bad press around him for a very long time. He's often involved in legal disputes. He had a very messy divorce. So he's not well regarded. And the interesting part was this was one moment where it appeared like he did make some PR. He got some PR benefits from firing Donnelly in this way. Lots around this, Ewan, but what is your initial take? Because I know that you've heard about this week as well.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I understand this might upset some people. I don't really care what side of this issue you might fall on from a legal perspective. This is actually very simple and very straightforward. And that is that the employer has the right to terminate the employee without cause for any reason or no reason whatsoever, should they choose to do so, provided they provide that employee with reasonable notice of the termination of his employment. So, I mean, that's it, Cam. Now, do I think that they turned around and terminated him for just cause? And we've sort of talked about that distinction before on the show, right? Just cause meaning that, you're suggesting that the employee committed some act of willful misconduct or disobedience such that they're not entitled to any termination or severance pay. I would be very surprised if the Canucks took that position with regard to Donnelly. I suspect what they did was just said, get rid of him, pay him whatever we owe him under his contract and, the sort of statutory minimum provisions under the law, and be done with it. And that is their right. They can do that. So cue the uproar from anyone who is sympathetic to his particular political views. But this doesn't have to be a matter of politics. From a simple legal perspective, the Canucks were entitled to let him go. Okay,
I'm going to have to make part of this really clear, just so there's no misunderstanding. When you look at this from a PR perspective, my advice to Francesco Aquilini would have been to let him go. I think in this environment and with the politics around the issue of COVID, that view is largely considered to be quite toxic and a fringe view. Now, people can debate that, and maybe there are more people than you would think that oppose the lockdown. Actually, I think there are a lot of people that oppose the lockdown, but there's so much evidence in favor of the methods governments are taking that it is a largely consensus view. At least that's my understanding. And also, regardless of whether it's a consensus view or not, when there's a public uproar, and those people are your customers, and you don't want to piss them off, this is what you have to do. You have to let him go. And that would have been my advice. So I want to make that really clear, that from a PR perspective, this was necessary and this went down in general the right way. Now, I want to talk from a political standpoint. One of the things, and so I'm no longer addressing the PR issue here. One of the things that Donnelly said was this, quote, "Sports figures, entertainers, politicians, etc. can stand for anything as long as it supports the narrative. You can support rioting, looting, destructions of livelihoods and reputation, but take a position against the narrative and you are worthy of exile or worse." End quote. I disagree fundamentally with Donnelly on these issues, and I want to be really clear about that. I'm in favor of the restrictions. I'm in favor of the lockdown. We've been going through them here in Hong Kong to a degree as well. They work. I mean, that's my message for everyone in North America. They work. If you wear masks, I'm in a city of almost 8 million people, and it's hot and humid, and we have almost no COVID here. So it works. That said, I support Donnelly's right to speak his mind. And I do worry. The bigger problem here to me is that there is such a public uproar over someone expressing his viewpoint publicly. And he's not declaring that he's a member of the KKK or anything really incendiary like that. He's opposing a government policy. At the root here, he's come out and said, I disagree with what the government is doing. And I wish, just from a society perspective, that we were a little more forgiving of people with different points of view. Again, I don't support his point of view. I'm completely the opposite, in fact. But this is dangerous, in my view, when we have this sort of, it's almost like mob justice to some degree, because the Canucks have no option. They have to let him go because there's the pressure from the public. But I think this gets dangerous, because if it's this policy today, that's one thing. But I don't know what it's going to be tomorrow or the next day, and if you will be on the right side or not. Right? I mean, you never know. This could be you 5 years from now if you disagree fundamentally with something, and you could be facing ostracism. So that's my little soapbox speech here, Ewan.
Well, good speech. Good speech. I like it. My issue with his quote is, I think he's conflating a number of issues. The problem is he's not Joe Public. He's not some random private citizen who wants to go out and express his political views on a particular issue. He does have that right. In fact, there's nothing that is preventing him from attending this rally, from expressing whatever viewpoint he may happen to have around the issue of restrictions and lockdowns and COVID and freedom or lack of freedom. And really, I wish people would just come up with a synonym for freedom. Everybody's just throwing the word freedom around. I mean, the English language is rich and cultured. Let's come up with some other words. But anyway, putting that aside, he is an extension of the brand. He is part of the Canucks brand. He is synonymous with the Canucks brand. So when he wants to go out and express this particular view, he is not simply doing so as a private citizen. He is doing so as a reflection of that particular brand. And we've talked about this on the show many, many times, Cam, that private citizens, when they step out onto the streets, they are free to say and do as they choose, for the most part. However, if they're going to put forward a particular view that is inconsistent with the views of their company, and they're going to choose to do that in a high-profile fashion such that it garners the kind of media attention that this has, then they can be subject to disciplinary measures from their employer. And that's what's going on here. So it's not as simple as, well, I can't express my view. That's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. He can express his view, and the Canucks are entitled to express their view on the issue and ensure that individuals who are reflective of their brand put that message out in a consistent fashion. He's chosen not to do that. He's lost his job accordingly. And there is nothing wrong with that under the law.
That is 100% correct. And we have talked about this on the show a lot. You have the right to take action as an employer or an employee to say something or do something, but then, whoever you've impacted also has a right to deal with it. And he was within his rights to go out and speak his mind, and the Canucks were within their rights to let him go. And as I said off the top, it was the right decision, because regardless of what I personally think about sort of this sort of mob mentality that we've got now, it's there. And part of PR is looking at the situation and going, okay, this is what we're dealing with. We can't sugarcoat it. We can't try and sort of make it more agreeable to us. We have to deal with reality. And this is reality. This is what it means. And, this point of view. And also, I think, you're right, Ewan. Him stepping out to speak publicly and then sort of be profiled by the Vancouver Sun. I mean, that's a big step as well. That's drawing a lot of public attention to his viewpoint, and that's dangerous. I mean, yeah, I agree with what you said. And when we stand back,
and that's just it. You can't have your cake and eat it too, right, Cam? I mean, he's been invited to sing at this particular event. Do you think he would have been invited to sing at this event if he was just, Joe Public who happens to be, qualified to go out and sing the national anthem? No, he's there because of his profile. He's not there as private citizen. He's there because of his profile, and likely would have been introduced as, Donnelly, singer of the national anthem for the Vancouver Canucks. So he is capitalizing on his own brand and his own profile in support of his own political views. So it's entirely disingenuous to then turn around and say he can't express his viewpoint as a private citizen.
Nobody said that.
When the very meaning of him being there in the first place is not as a private citizen. It's reflective of his value as a brand associated with the Vancouver Canucks.
Okay, I haven't heard anybody say he couldn't express his views. I think obviously he can express his views, and he did express his views. If you're referring to sort of what I spoke about a little bit earlier, it's not even really about Mark Donnelly. It really is, where are we with political discourse? And this goes in Canada and the United States, because on some level there are issues where this is a whole other discussion, and maybe for another show. But I mean, on the right and the left, I mean, if people come forward with certain viewpoints, it's almost not even tolerated anymore. And I do feel like it is on both sides, and it's unfortunate. And so, I wonder 20 years ago, for instance, if something like this happened, if there would have been such an uproar when an anthem singer comes out and says he disagrees with the provincial government. Like, in a way, it seems like such a mundane thing, but it's not okay now. And it's not that it's not okay because the Canucks don't think it's okay. It's not okay because people don't think it's okay. It's not okay because of the vast number of people and citizens in British Columbia and in Vancouver who don't think it's okay to have this viewpoint, right? I mean, they say we can't tolerate people who think this way. And so the pressure mounts and he loses a job. So certainly I understand fully the process that played out. And like I said earlier, I would certainly support the same action. The one thing I will say, though, they did ask Donnelly if he heard from the Canucks, and he said he did not. He said he had not spoken to anyone with the team, but he did say he wished he would have received a phone call, because he said that would have been a more respectful way to find out that he doesn't have a job. That's probably my only quibble.
Well, I'm sorry, Cam. I have to interject there briefly.
Sure.
But that then cuts both ways. Did he make a phone call or send an email to advise his employer that, hey, I'm going to be speaking at this high profile rally or singing this high profile rally? Are you guys okay with that? I don't know that he extended that courtesy to expect the courtesy in return.
Yep. I still, regardless though, it would have been a nice thing to do. You are firing somebody who had worked for you for 20 years. So I think, I mean, again, if it was me, the PR guy on the phone with the owner of the Canucks, I would have said, you have to let him go, but give him a call. Like, at least do it properly, and then put it out on Twitter. That would have been sort of my way to do it, because it just looks, not that it looks good for Donnelly, it just looks better for the public, that he managed it that way. But I think this is a very minor kind of footnote to the whole saga. But you said something important, Ewan, earlier about, if you're going to these public events, it is really important for people to consider this now. And not just going to public events. I mean, I've done workshops about people who, post to Facebook or Reddit or whatever it might be. And, a lot of people have very strong political views. And, this stuff goes online and it's there for a long time. And your boss can find it, or someone else can find it and send it to your boss. If someone can find out your name, they can cross-reference it with LinkedIn, where you put your employer. I mean, this stuff is dangerous all the time. And whether it's going out to something like this, you should think about, in case you are photographed there, is that going to be okay? There were instances last year, Ewan, during the protests. I mean, here in Hong Kong, it's a sensitive issue. I mean, there's 1 million people on the street opposing the government, but the government controls a lot of the companies. And so, we were concerned about having our own staff photographed there. And we had an instance where a Cathay Pacific pilot was arrested at the protest. And as a result, the Chinese government forced out the CEO of Cathay and the chairman of Swire over that. So the company had to be completely reformed because of that person being at a protest. So that's much more severe. But I think the point stands. You have to be careful with what you're doing publicly, whether it's online or offline, because it can have disastrous results. And you might not think you're a big deal, or maybe your position is not very senior, or maybe you're not in the public eye, but you might become in the public eye. It might happen to you in a way that you don't expect, and it can really destroy your life sometimes. So it's something to think about.
Yeah, I sort of see two competing issues here, Cam. I agree with you on the one hand, right? I mean, critical discourse is fundamental to a free and democratic society. I mean, and it really is. And we need to permit people to express a viewpoint that we may not like. And if people take issue with that, well, then perhaps they should consider living in a different country, because that's what democracy is all about in its truest form. But on the other hand, Cam, and to bring it back to a legal position, an employment law position, an employer has a duty to provide a safe working environment for their employees. So if you, as a private citizen, as an individual, decide that during a lockdown, you're going to attend a huge rally surrounded by hundreds or thousands of other people, and none of you are wearing masks, then your employer can absolutely take a position that you are compromising the safety and well-being of your colleagues, and you can't come back to work. You're going to have to stay home and quarantine, and then we will let you back into the office because you have demonstrated that you are capable of observing the social distancing and safety policies that have been put in place by, the government, by our workplace. These are real issues, and that's not about your political views, Cam. That's about ensuring the safety of your colleagues.
Well, there's no Canucks games at the moment, so he's probably okay on that score. But who knows what? Who knows what else he's doing? Hopefully, the Canucks come back sometime soon. Anything else to add on this, Ewan?
No, I hope that we have some people chime in who are supportive of Donnelly, because I'm sort of at a bit of a loss, at least from a legal perspective, as to how you support his position. So if there are people who are supportive of his particular viewpoint and think he's been wronged here, I'd love to get your take, and perhaps we can talk about it on a future episode.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ewan. We do want to hear about this because, like you and I also think, even from a PR perspective, there's not much that could have been done here because this is what happens. I mean, this is how the world works, and this is how media works, and this is what I would have advised. However, I hope we can all step back and at some point agree that we should be a little more tolerant of people who have different opinions from our own, because I feel like that's one thing that we're losing, not just in the United States and Canada, but in a lot of different places. I mean, we see that here in Hong Kong, even, it's you're on one side or the other, and you can't even talk about these things, and it's unfortunate. But hopefully people can listen to this and let us know what you think.
Wait a minute.
Check this out.
Whoa, hey, check this out. No, wait. Oh, check it out.
I want you to check this out.
On the PR and Law podcast.
What have you got, Ewan?
Well, Cam, I wanted to talk about this particular issue because we have discussed HBO Max a few times on this show, usually in the context of what in the hell is HBO Max relative to all of its other platforms. But I saw a story, as I suspect you probably did, because it was huge news earlier this week. And I think people are much clearer now on what exactly it is that HBO Max is and does. And that was the announcement that HBO Max has partnered with Warner Brothers Pictures and will be releasing 17 movies, Cam, its entire 2021 slate, simultaneously in movie theaters and on the streaming service. And I think this is just, we can link to a particular Variety story that I read, which got some really interesting comment from movie theaters and other production studios. This is huge. Now, Warner Brothers has said this is just a one-off. It's only for 2021. But, already a lot of people are saying, well, look, this is Pandora's box and the genie is out of the bottle, to mix my metaphors. And that once this is done, we're not going to go back. And I suspect they're probably right. And that this will fundamentally change the way that we consume content.
So I'm glad you brought this up for a few reasons, because yes, this is a big change. And the HBO deal isn't the first one. There have been several movies released this year on streaming platforms, but it's the first one of this depth, I guess, with so many films. And it was interesting because HBO has really been blasted hard by the media for the way it rolled out HBO Max, which we talked about on this show, but also that HBO was always known as a smaller channel, but really high quality, that's where you went for the best. And they've ended up in launching Max, licensing just a ton of other content and throwing it on there. So it's sort of like Netflix. And in the process, diluted the brand by quite a bit. And then the other brand that launched to laughter, Apple, what is it? Apple News Plus or Apple TV Plus. And they launched with, I think, 6 or 7 shows, which were all pretty bad. But since then, they've gone out and poured serious money into very select movies and TV series that are now getting nominations. And I read a great comparison of this the other day, how HBO has kind of left that open by trying to serve everybody through this Max platform. And Apple's just doing its own thing with its own shows. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out over the long term. And I think this injection of movies, of 17 of them, I think you said, is going to be quite big, I think, for HBO Max, and hopefully kind of set the brand on the right course. Because I think of all the streaming services that launched, minus Quibi, HBO Max would probably be the one that's had the most trouble. Yeah, agreed. I mean, I was just kind of blown away by this. I mean, given the lineup, right? I mean, we're talking the 4th Matrix movie, Dune, Lin-Manuel Miranda's In the Heights, the Suicide Squad. I mean, the idea that rather than going to the movie theater for one of these big releases on that day, you can just curl up on your couch and watch the same film. I mean, I don't see how this does anything other than just destroy the cinema experience of going to the movies. Way that we know it. Tenet came out on streaming, right, this year, right away. And then there was the Tom Hanks movie, which was supposed to be a blockbuster, also came out on streaming. It's not the first ones, but I know that the movie studios have been reluctant to do it. They've been doing them one-off, basically, throughout this pandemic. And they're not recouping the money at all. It's not even close to what it would be if it was a proper box office. And that makes me think that this might be temporary, because it's either that or movie budgets are going to have to come way down, because you just can't get the same income as a result of this. Well, yeah, and that's the thing, right? I mean, that I don't know what a monthly subscription to HBO Max is going to be, but I mean, I think it's $50 monthly.
How much?
I think it's $15, $14.99. Yeah, because it's been around for a while already. Yeah.
So effectively, it's the equivalent of going to see one of these films in the theater, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. I'll be very curious to see how this plays out. I mean, it, like any other disruptor, initially people are saying, oh, it's going to destroy the industry and it'll be the end of blah, blah, blah as we know it. And then, the industry changes and adapts and everything seems to continue on. So perhaps this will do the same. Who knows? Well, anyway, what do you got?
Yeah, I'll get to that in just a sec. I think I hear where you're going with that, but I feel like music never really came back. Like after it was disrupted by technology, it's never come to the same level that it was before, and streaming and even just buying albums digitally has never been able to replace the revenue that was generated previously. And I think the same may happen with movies. And maybe that's, I read an article a long time ago just about that. Maybe that's what music is actually worth now that anybody can buy it anywhere at any time, and anyone can publish music anywhere at any time, that we're seeing the true value, the monetary value of an album or of a song or of music in general. And maybe movies will go through the same sort of process. Maybe they're just really overpriced and those prices are going to have to come down. The one I wanted to mention is also a little bit businessy, but there was a big story that broke over the last many days of Slack being acquired by Salesforce. Slack launched a long time ago, around 2010 or 2011, I think. And I have a bit of a tie to the company. I was on the list of beta versions of Slack just before it got officially released, because a girl that I used to work with years and years ago in Canada is the wife of one of the Slack founders. And so I had a bit of an insight that way to get the software. So I tried it really early on, and I've used it on and off since, in different roles that I've had. And it went from the darling of startups to, it's now an app that most people love to hate on most of the time, because like anything, it's grown to become something that it was trying to get people away from, which is this monolithic channel that you need to be constantly engaging with all the time, which is what email used to be. So it hasn't really improved on that at the end of the day. But there's a great article just about how Microsoft actually has been able to crush Slack for the most part with the launch of Teams a couple of years ago. And this is an article written by Casey Newton. I wrote about him on my own blog. He was at The Verge for a long time. He's probably one of the top tech writers, I would say, in the US. And he has moved to Substack, which is also the cool thing to do these days, where he's publishing his newsletter directly. And his newsletter is called The Platformer. And it really is mostly about, social platforms and what they're dealing with in terms of censorship and misinformation and things like that. But he has a long piece looking at the how Microsoft and Slack have competed over the last several years. Because, it's interesting, Ewan, when Microsoft Teams launched, like they felt that, Slack really was starting to cut into its territory a bit. And on the day that Teams launched, Slack bought a full page ad in the New York Times to basically welcome Teams into the market, but said Slack is here to stay and we're just getting started. But you move on from that day, Teams now has 115 million users. Slack has 12 million. So Teams has basically crushed it. And of course, Salesforce and Microsoft are bitter enemies as well. Salesforce has really moved in on Microsoft's turf in so many different areas as well. So that's a fascinating rivalry. And I think Slack is going to help Salesforce quite a bit. So this is one I definitely would recommend if you love business and you love technology and sort of the inside scoop on a pretty bitter rivalry. This is definitely one to check out.
Very interesting. Yeah. I don't know how it's the integration, right? The fact that Teams comes with Office 365. So I think where they've been really successful, and this is largely anecdotal, as you know, Cam, I don't follow the sort of tech news the way that I know you do, but you've had a lot of boomers be sort of compelled to engage with this technology for the first time. And, I suspect that the numbers would bear out that they're not getting in at Slack. They're getting in with Teams because it's integrated in the software suite that they've otherwise been using, right? They're still using their Microsoft Word and their PowerPoint and their Excel and their Outlook email. And this is just one new app in the universe of programs that they're already accustomed to using.
Yeah, absolutely. And Slack is it's done well, but yeah, it's not software that you're going to go, pick up it. Yeah, if you're a boomer, it's really for the entrepreneur crowd and the startup crowd in San Francisco. And it's had a difficult time kind of breaking out of that. But anyway, still, I'm glad both of them, it looks like, are going to survive anyway. Anything else, Ewan, to add on this show?
That's all I got, Cam. That's all I got.
I think we shared enough opinions for one show.
Yeah, we kind of did, didn't we? Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, thanks for joining us. As mentioned, we are going to have Courtney on next week from Gotham PR to talk some politics, and she'll let me know she's got some really cool clips to play as well. So we're going to break down speeches and messages from some politicians that you know well. So I'm really looking forward to having her on. So that'll be next week. So don't miss a show. You can subscribe to the PR and Law podcast in your podcast app of choice, or you can subscribe to our YouTube or SoundCloud channels. And you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we are also on, I mentioned YouTube and SoundCloud already. All right, it's getting late. You can also sign up for our newsletter as well, prlawpodcast.club. So for you and Christy, this is Cam McMurtry. Light it up.
This has been the PR and Law Podcast with Cam McMurtry and Ewan Christie. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or leave a review. You can also join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by following our account at PR Law Podcast. That's all one word, PRLAW Podcast. Thanks for your support.